So there were actually two parties in the American founding. There were the Jefferson's party, who admired the French Revolution. Washington, John Jay, Hamilton, Adams, Gouverneur Morris, who was the principal drafter of the American Constitution, they were conservatives. Conservatives begin from a different place. We begin with a nation. Men and women were not born free and equal.
We're born with obligations to the past, obligations to the future.
That's a kind of learning we don't do anymore. Parents tell their children, it doesn't matter what you decide as long as it makes you happy. And they don't say, you owe something to the people who brought us here. We have a permanent cultural revolution which will never stop until it destroys everything.
Hello and welcome to NTD's Fresh Look America. I'm your host, Paul Greaney. Here at the 2022 National Conservatism Conference in Miami, Florida, we're joined by Yoram Hazony. Hazony is the chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation, the organizer of this event. He's also the author of a terrific new book, Conservatism, a Rediscovery. I've never had so many aha moments from reading a book in a long time. Among other things, the book explains the difference between a conservative and a classic liberal. It also lays out a path back to true conservatism, which Hazony says would provide the stable society so many today long for. Yoram, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So as I said, I love the book. Maybe we can start with Edmund Burke. So back in the 18th century, Burke was dealing with both Marxists overseas and in France during the Revolution, but he was also contending with classic liberals in the United Kingdom. What did Burke believe that put him at odds with these two groups?
Well, I'm not sure that there was such a big difference between the liberals in England that Burke was criticizing and the revolutionaries in France. I mean, it's certainly true that Dr. Price and Charles James Fox and the other liberals that Burke was famous for opposing, it's certainly true that they weren't running through the streets killing people, and in France that is what was happening. But you'll notice that Price and Fox and their colleagues, they supported the French Revolution. They were enthusiastic about it because they said, look, even if blood is being shed, the important thing is the ideas, and the ideas are that all human beings should be treated as free and equal. And Burke said, hold on a second. Freedom and equality are, of course, important things. But what about the possibility of being able to preserve and transmit our kingdom through the centuries? And that distinction between people who say all of politics can be reduced to the freedom and equality of the individual, those are liberals, and conservatives who, both before and after Burke, who say, no, wait, hold on a second. Liberty and equality is not sufficient to preserve anything. And if you want to think about how your people is going to continue through the centuries, then you're a conservative, you're talking about something else. You're talking about a different set of ideas.
What were those ideas?
Well, look, to begin with, and this is very famous, is that Burke says that the connection between past generations and the present and the future is something that's a given. It's not something that we choose. We don't choose the family we're born into. We don't choose the nation that we're born into. But we have obligations to the people who created this country and gave us everything that we have. And we have obligations to future generations. And that view that it's not simply a contract of the people who exist, but that the past and the present and the future have to all have a say in politically what's happening, that spoke to a much more traditional way of understanding things, a conservative way of understanding things, which we have largely lost at this point.
Can you give some specific examples of that, what exactly we have lost?
The most obvious thing is religion. For Burke, and in this Burke is continuing many centuries of English tradition. For Burke, he says that the established church in England is the first and most important of our prejudices. That is, it comes before anything else. Now, why is that? He argues that every society has a framework of ideas within which everything happens, sort of the basic assumptions. Today we call them guardrails. What are the things that it's simply beyond common sense to start saying or thinking? Those guardrails are inherited. We don't decide on them every generation. And the principal institution that sets up the guardrails, that gives us the boundaries, that gives us our common sense, is religion. Now, in the United States, for example, that was understood up until, I think, World War II. FDR or Eisenhower still thought, just as Burke did, that the basic guardrails in society come from Christianity. They come from biblical religion. But beginning in the 1940s, the United States and most European countries said we don't need religion anymore. The state shouldn't have anything to do with it. This principle of separation of church and state was effectively invented in the 1940s as a response to the tragedy of the two world wars. And very soon after that, God is banished from the classroom. The Bible is banished from the classroom. Prayer is banished from the classroom. And I think that you can see today's crazy cultural revolution as being a direct descendant from that. 2 generations after the Bible is banned from the classroom, people have difficulty distinguishing between a man and a woman.
We talk about today, I want to get to the modern day, but even at America's founding, I think a lot of us think that, it was a major revolution. They wanted to upend the English system and install something new. But you argue that George Washington and the Federalists, they wanted to preserve English traditions or conventions rather than just upend it and replace it with something new. How did you reach that understanding?
Well, I reached that understanding because that's what Washington's party said explicitly. Hamilton is famous for saying that the best constitution in the world is the English Constitution. John Adams, another one of the leading Federalists, wrote an entire book to show that the English Constitution is, in fact, the best constitution in history. Jefferson was so angry that the Federalists were saying that the English common law and English political traditions are what should be emulated, that he called them heretics and apostates. So there were actually 2 parties in the American founding. There were the Jefferson's party, who admired the French Revolution, believed that in fact the French Revolution was the right idea, and Jefferson was famous for writing letters in which he said, this generation owes past generations nothing. The past generations are like a foreign country to us. So that was the liberal revolutionary left at the time of the American founding. And Washington, John Jay, Hamilton, Adams, Gouverneur Morris, who was the principal drafter of the American Constitution, they were conservatives who sought to restore much of the English Constitution. Now, obviously, they were Republicans. They didn't want to have a king, but they did want to have a single person, the president, as the executive, all the power of the executive in one man. They believed in a bicameral legislature with the power to legislate and to tax. Those things are straight out of the English Constitution. The executive veto, it goes on and on, the jury trial. All the basic framework of the American Constitution is a restoration of the English Constitution adopted to America. And the Jeffersonians said, this is no revolution, this is a betrayal of the revolution.
Can you expound on that a little bit, what the English gave us that perhaps now we feel is just the natural way of things or the natural way of life?
If you read the writings of Turgot, for example, he's a French political theorist who was very popular at the time of the American Revolution. And his arguments are like Jefferson's. He says, we need to apply pure reason, just reason, no tradition. Pure reason will give us the answer. And from pure reason, he argues, that that there should be no separation of powers in the government. There should be one assembly that is both the executive and the legislative, no bicameral legislature. Turgot and his friends all argued that the English Constitution, it's not according to reason. It's a crazy contraption that prevents the people from being able to express their will. And so the French Revolution is an attempt to apply the political theory of Turgot, who was himself following Rousseau. This was also tried in the United States. The new Constitution of Pennsylvania was according to these rationalist theories. And if you read about what happened in Pennsylvania during the American Revolution, it's very similar to the French Revolution. And the Washington, who was looking at the increasing radicalism and violence and the revolutionary fervor that was being unleashed, he didn't say more revolution. Early on in the revolution, he began circulating letters saying, we need a strong central government that will, as much as possible, be according to the English model. And that's in the end what the Americans had, because it's the Federalists who won politically and wrote the American Constitution and established the first national American government, which Jefferson would have opposed.
So let's use this period of history to maybe contrast the two systems. So like you mentioned, before the Constitution was signed that we have today, there were about 10 years of a Constitution that was based on reason, if I'm not mistaken. Can you explain why it failed and what role reason had in its failure? The first Constitution.
Americans had a constitutional tradition. In the first place, they were trained in English law, meaning that Americans printed and bought more copies of Blackstone's description of the common law than English did. That was the way that Americans were trained. In addition, the American colonies had 150 years of previous experience with constitutions that had been fitted to the American colonies. Most of those constitutions were imitations of the English Constitution. Again, without a king and without an aristocracy, but all of the rest of the structure was based on English models and on the common law. Among other things, they had established churches, for example. Now, when the revolution came, the question was, what are we going to have as the national American Constitution? And there was a constitution. Today we call it the Articles of the Confederation, but it was the first American Constitution. It was the Constitution of 1777. And it went very much according to these rationalist French ideas. It was a single chamber, which was both an executive and a legislature. It functioned as a committee, which was supposed to be able to make decisions. Now, this committee, because it didn't have a unified executive, so it couldn't make forceful decisions. It didn't have the ability to do the kinds of things that you needed to win a war. It wasn't able to raise troops. It wasn't able to raise taxes. Even once a peace was signed with England, this constitution prevented the Americans from being able to impose the treaty that they'd signed with Britain on the states. This led a group of soldiers and lawyers, beginning with Washington and John Jay, and then Hamilton, Knox, the rest of their colleagues, led them to the conclusion that even civic disturbances within the colonies, there was no way to put them down because the central government was so weak. And they came to the conclusion that what's necessary is a restoration. And they achieved it. By the way, Jefferson, who was the greatest detractor of the English Constitution, the man who represented reason in America, him and Tom Paine, both he and Paine were abroad they were in Paris during the time that the Federalists were drafting the American Revolution. The historian Gertrude Himmelfarb once said, "This is the proof that there was God's providence was taking care of America. That the two great rationalists, Jefferson and Paine, were both overseas and weren't around to prevent the American Constitution from being written."
Let's fast forward to today. What passes for conservatism generally, you feel, and what will it take to get back to the brand of conservatism like George Washington or a Burke or a Selden?
Well, look, again, there's two main streams in American political thought. If you are the kind of person who begins by saying, look, by nature, human beings are free and equal. That's the main thing you need to do to understand in order to understand politics. Then your politics is a liberal politics. There are many different kinds of liberals, more progressive, more classical, but all liberals agree that the freedom and equality of the individual is the main thing you need to know in order to be able to understand politics, what's right and what's wrong in politics. Conservatives begin from a different place. We begin with a nation. Men and women we're not born free and equal. We're born into families where our freedom is very limited, and we're certainly not the equals of our parents or our grandparents or even our older brothers and sisters. And yet we have obligations. And the conservative begins with an empirical view of what human beings really are like. We're born into obligations. We're born into community. Now, it's true that as adults, we may shift to a different family, a different country, a different religion. But when we join that different country or religion, even after we make that choice, we enter into an existing community with existing traditions, and our obligations are not chosen. Our obligations are the obligations that tradition places on us. And so a conservative looks at America today, and much of Europe as well, and says, look, we see that the country's on the edge. We see that everything is decaying. What does that mean, that everything is decaying? It means that the transmission of a kind of common sense and understanding of what are the basic ground rules, what are the basic guidelines, what are the things that we cherish and honor. Parents, the Bible, the military, the educational institutions, our Constitution, all of these things are at this point, when you're a kid, you're told in school, look, just make your own decisions for yourself. Be free. Decide whatever you want to decide. Parents tell their children, look, it doesn't matter what you decide as long as it makes you happy. And they don't say, you owe something to the people who brought us here. So we live in a liberal society in which children are told all the time that everything is going to be fine if they do what makes them happy. And we need to move back to a conservative society. I mean, if we want to save America, if we want it to continue to exist, then we have to go back to teaching our children, look, there are things we owe to our ancestors. There are things that we owe to our descendants. And some of these things are hard to do. All right? Some of these things are difficult, and nonetheless you have these obligations. Americans don't want to say that to their children anymore, but that's the only way that there can be a country 2 generations from now.
So we're not born free. We're born with responsibilities. We're born with guardrails. We're born with obligations to the past, obligations to the future. But you're saying because people feel they're free, these things are whittling away. These things these require substance.
Sure.
But we're not doing that. So
yes.
This is the reason we see the degradation in the society.
Yes. When we say every man is free, ask yourself, what are you free from? Okay, so a nice thought would be, well, you're free from being enslaved. Okay, that makes sense. But look, I mean, America hasn't had slavery for a long time. So why do they keep telling everyone that you're free? And the truth is that what you're free from is you're free from giving honor to your parents. You're free from obeying the laws of the country. You're free from defending the Constitution. You're free, in fact, you're free from the past. You're free from your ancestors. You're free from the people who created this country. You're free from the Bible. You're free from the traditional faith of your fathers. That's what people are free from. And since they're free, they do whatever is right in their own eyes, and it turns out that you can't preserve a country that way. It's impossible. We've tried it, since World War II. We've tried it. We tried it for 2 generations, and now it's over. All of the inherited common sense and traditions and the spiritual and social capital, all of that has been frittered away. And at this point, if a young man, woman, a couple, an older couple, if you want to actually contribute to a life of conservation and transmission, you actually have to go to those remaining few communities, Orthodox Christian communities, Orthodox Jewish communities, those places where the traditions are still being handed down and where children are still being raised to believe that they owe their ancestors something. And we need to say, look, I'm rethinking my life. I'm rethinking what is valuable to me, and approach these Orthodox congregations as someone who wants to learn and say, I'd like for you to teach me. I'm not equal. I'm ignorant. I want to overcome my ignorance. Teach me how to conserve and transmit things to future generations, because I don't want to be part of the Cultural Revolution. I don't want to destroy everything that exists.
And this is how to live a conservative life. This is what it takes. Does someone need to be a Christian or a Jew and to believe in God to be a true conservative?
Look, in theory, I'm sure that there are in other nations. There can be a Buddhist conservatism in India, which has different views, different ideas in the world. I'm not saying that you can't learn things that are true from other cultures. But if you want to conserve your own civilization, the place you have to start is by mastering the ideas that you inherit from your own family, your own tradition. Later, once you're an accomplished practicing Christian or an accomplished practicing Jew, then you can also learn from other cultures, and you can see whether there's some things you'd like to adjust. But the foundation, the bedrock, has to be how can I take upon myself the things that my ancestors were trying to hand down to me, and people aren't even trying. It's not that they try hard for a whole number of years, and then they realize it's not for them, so they say, oh, instead of being a Catholic, I'd better be a Protestant, or instead of being a Protestant, I'd better be a Jew. That's not what's happening. Mostly what's happening is people have this caricature of, the Bible is ignorance, my ancestors were against reason, the things that they did were unreasonable, so I don't have any reason to learn from them. I can just sit on my couch, do drugs or play video games. I don't need to get married young. I don't have any obligation to bring children into the world. I don't need to ask myself, what would I need to do for my children to be healthy? I don't need to ask these questions because I don't owe anyone anything, right? And so yes, that's a liberal life, and a conservative life would begin in the other place by saying, I want to maintain my inheritance. I'm not saying it's perfect. Maybe it needs to be repaired somewhat. But first of all, I need to be able to transmit it. I need to be able to pass it on. And I'm telling you, young people today, 2 generations at least already have no idea how to pass anything on, even the things they value. Let's say that you want to get married to a young woman, you want to stay married to that woman. Do you know how to stay married? You don't. You don't know how to stay married because all you know is how to be free. The moment that she said that she starts saying things that upset you, you'll start talking about divorce, because you don't no, you haven't inherited the skill of keeping a family together for 50 or 80 years. Those things, that knowledge exists, but our young people don't have it. And if they want to be able to stay married, then they have to go find a community where that knowledge still exists. The same is true for a country. The same is true for anything you want to preserve.
But it's so true. And these things are really difficult. Having a family, maintaining a marriage, bringing up kids, it takes, and there is nowhere to turn. Where do you read a book? Watch a YouTube video? It's not possible.
No, it's not. You cannot, look, there are good books that describe conservatism. Okay, you were very kind in talking about my book, which is about my wife and I and our journey to leading a conservative life. And there are other good books that I name in my footnotes and everything. There are good books. The problem is that reading a book doesn't teach you what you need in order to, even if everything in it is true and accurate, it doesn't really teach you what you need to live a certain life. Human beings can only learn to live a certain life by imitating other human beings. So you can read the book can inspire you, it can give you a direction, but in the end you have to find a community where the traditions are actively being handed down, because only in such a community can you learn the infinite detail, the infinite richness and depth of a way of life, which is always, when it's a book, it's always a kind of a cartoon version. The real version is those older people. You go to, if you go to a church or a synagogue that still has couples in their 60s who stayed married their whole lives, couples in their 70s and their 80s who stayed married their whole lives. If you spend time with those people, you'll immediately begin to absorb things, to notice things that you can't find in any book. And you'll ask them questions and they'll give you answers. And those answers, you'll say, wow, why wasn't that in any of the books I read? It's simply a different way of thinking about life, where you need models. You need models of the right life. You need to choose them carefully, but then you need to imitate them. You need to learn from them. That's a kind of learning we don't do anymore, because we think that your education stops after high school or after college or after you get a PhD. We think education stops, but actually much of our education is as adults, if what we're doing is looking for the previous generations and saying, tell me how to live, and watching what they do. That's a different life. That's a conservative life.
It's really, the way you've put it, from the perspective of everyone is a liberal. Left and right, everyone is a liberal. And you even mentioned a word when you talked about how people look at the Bible or look at other traditional religious texts. They feel that it's not rational. It's not reasonable, and so they just reject it without even actually seeing what it means.
Yes, and I think the Bible is a particularly important example, because even religious people today, if they're university educated, they're used to an environment in which you never quote the Bible. You never quote the Bible, not because there's nothing true in the Bible. You never quote the Bible because our society looks down on it. If you start talking about the Bible, people think you're an ignorant person or you're a foolish person. Right? So look, I've published books on the Bible. My learning the Bible together with my family is something that is ongoing. I never stop learning from the Bible, but I'm very much aware that if you've never done it, if you've never regularly studied the Bible, then it does look alien. It does look alien. Because it looks alien, you assume that it's foolish. But look, there are countless intelligent. Don't have such contempt for your ancestors. They used to read the Bible every day. They weren't foolish people. Maybe you disagree with them about some things, but they weren't foolish people. The reason they read the Bible every day is because it gave them something. And what we need to ask is, we can see the catastrophe coming. It's at the door. The Cultural Revolution is going. It's going to destroy everything its path. Isn't it worth just trying to start studying the Bible and see if you can be charitable enough to try to understand what your ancestors, why they thought you should study it. Why not? What do we have to lose at this point? I mean, okay, so you'll be embarrassed if someone finds out. So put together a circle and do it quietly. I'll bet you anything that very quickly you'll be surprised to discover, my ancestors, they weren't that stupid. There are some things in here that are important to me.
How do you go about talking to people about these things who believe, like you said, that the ancestors were ignorant, that we're progressing, we're smarter now than we've ever been, we have technology, I don't believe in God. They have all of these, I believe in freedom, liberty, no restraints, this is my God-given right. How do you begin to speak to these people?
The first thing to notice is you ask them, you believe that the current system where, everybody is told from the time they're 8 years old that they make their own decisions. They decide whether they're a girl or a boy. They make their own decisions. Is this society heading in the right direction? Because I think most normal people can see by this point that society is not heading in the right direction. That telling everyone, you don't need tradition, you don't need wisdom, you don't need experience, just make it up as you go along. We can see where it's led. It's led to overthrowing everything. It's not merely that we've overthrown religion. That was the beginning. But now we've overthrown the idea of a border. We don't need borders. We don't need nations. We've overthrown the idea that we need men and women. Men and women don't. You could just choose. You can choose whether this egalitarianism of all choices, where every choice, no matter how ignorant and idiotic, no matter how damaging, no matter how painful, how evil, every choice is supposed to be basically okay because it was chosen freely. So we see, look, if you keep going like this, there's going to be nothing left of America. I think people can see that now. There's going to be nothing left of Europe. So the only way to see some other future other than decay, dissolution, civil war, and then finally domination by China or some other power. The only alternative is to say, I must have missed something. I have to rethink. I have to repent. I have to think, what did I contribute to this catastrophe? Because all of us have contributed. And I think as soon as you say, what did I contribute to the catastrophe, then you can start to ask the question. I gave up on honoring the past because I thought it was stupid. So now I see that if you don't honor the past, then you don't have a future. So maybe I'll rethink honoring the past. I think that's the way to start, is you see what's coming. You understand that we have a permanent cultural revolution which will never stop until it destroys everything. And the only alternative to that is a life of conservation and transmission. You put the guardrails back up and you become strong enough to be able to resist the call to overthrow everything. That's the only choice there is. And those communities still exist. Go find them. Marry somebody who agrees with you about this.
It's just incredible. It's just incredible. Yoram Hazony, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, sir.
Sure. Thank you for giving me so much time. A pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Yoram's new book is called Conservatism, a Rediscovery. As you can tell, it's a remarkable book. Thanks for watching.